So if you've been following my channel for a while, you would know that I used to talk about comic books. A lot. After all, it's in the name of my channel, Comics Division. And as you can see, it's something I don't talk about as much anymore. American comic books suck, to be honest with you. And this leads into the state of the industry, which is, it's not exactly doing all that great. It hasn't been doing great for a number of years, and this year has just been fucking brutal. Absolutely brutal. Starting with the beer bug, which caused Diamond Comics to shut down, which is the largest distributor of comic books for the direct market, which is your local comic book shop. And which led to pencils down throughout Marvel and DC, and yeah. And I think DC started looking for alternate means to distribute their books to the direct market. And now we're facing a huge bloodbath at DC where a bunch of people have been let go. And this further just kind of is an example of how bad the industry is. Maybe this might be a good move, but probably not. Welcome back to Pixel Nation Comics Division here. How the hell are you? I'm doing pretty good. DC Comics, not so much. Let's jump into this article by Bounding in the Comics. Report, massive layoffs at DC Comics and DC Universe by John F. Trent. Now, I'm going to start off by going and stating the obvious, which is comic books are for everyone. Anybody can go and walk into a store, slap down some cash, pick up a comic book, read it, and enjoy it. However, there's been some stuff going on with the industry over the last several years, and they've forgotten their key demographic, which just so happens to be men. Now, I always say that the people who show up at the shop is as diverse as the communities that surround the comic shop, which has led us to books like Female Furies, which is nothing more than absolutely terrible feminist propaganda, as well as the variant cover for Wonder Woman 1984 by Robin Eisenberg. And as you can see, this cover is ugly as sin, and I'm not sure who it's for or who would actually go and buy it. You see, it's people such as myself who are the comic book buying audience. On average, I used to spend between $60 and $80 a week, sometimes $100, on comics. I barely spend $40 a month now because American comics have become trash. So when a company goes and puts out a book, they're supposed to have a really good cover, a sexy cover. And I'm not just talking about having sexy women. I'm talking about sexy art, something that makes me want to go and buy your book. There's been plenty of times I've gone and picked up a new book because the artwork on the cover was amazing and the book sometimes was shit. But that's the idea of the cover, to get you to want to buy the book. And things like this Robin Eisenberg cover don't make me want to go and buy it. It's part of the reason why I've stopped buying American comic books. Now, before we jump back into these articles, I want to talk about the Comic-Con numbers. March is the last month where we actually have actual numbers on units sold. As you can see at the top here, number one was Spider-Woman at 142,000 units sold. And when we jump into April, we no longer have the units sold per month. It's kind of left blank, and it makes sense because this is when the lockdown started. However, now that we're into July and the national lockdowns have started to lift, there should be actual units sold again. But as you can see, there's nothing here. And it's probably because the sales numbers are abysmal right now. A new report indicates that DC Comics and DC Universe are undergoing massive layoffs with multiple high-level executives being let go. This new report from The Hollywood Reporter comes just days after Warner Media CEO, I think his name is actually pronounced Jeff Keelar, but sorry, I said Jeff, I meant Jason Keelar, but I think Jason Killer sounds a lot better. Explains that the restructuring the company in order to streamline decision making. Now, Warner Media is actually owned by AT&T, and needless to say, they are not impressed by their performance. As a matter of fact, I would not be surprised if DC Comic Books was shuttered and they were farmed out to be created by a third party. However, I would say that they would want to hang on to the IP so they can go and farm it for movies. Not only did he explain that the restructuring was to streamline decision making, but he also told the Hollywood Reporter it was to adapt to market changes. Killer stated, "So what these changes are largely about is me feeling very strongly that where a media company should go in terms of the future is to orient themselves as a customer-oriented company." Now, I find that statement to be kind of odd, to be honest with you, because what company is not going to be customer focused? I guess Marvel and DC, since their employees tend to be dicks to people who buy their product. But yes, a company should be customer focused. After all, you want to encourage people to buy your stuff. Just saying. And I guess if I waited to hold off on my opinion, I would have gotten my answer in this paragraph. He then detailed these changes represent prioritizing three different things. Number one, a customer orientation far more than a wholesale orientation. Number two, going direct to customer. And number three, going global. Now, I'm assuming that direct to customer, what they're referring to is actually going and distributing their product themselves to the local comic book shops rather than going through a third party such as Diamond Comics. Now, this list I'm about to read are some of the top execs over at DC Comics. The Hollywood Reporter reports that Editor-in-Chief Bob Harris, Senior Vice President of Publishing Strategies and Support Services Hank Canales, Vice President of Marketing and Creative Services Jonah Whelan, Vice President of Global Publishing Initiatives and Digital Strategies Bobby Chase, Senior Story Editor Brian Cunningham, and Executive Editor Mark Doyle were all axed. And it actually gets a lot worse, if you can believe that. In fact, they are reporting that roughly 1/3 of DC's editorial ranks are being laid off, according to sources. Now, I can't tell you how bad the editorial staff is over at DC, but what I can tell you is that at Marvel, it's pretty abysmal. I mean, there's like typos and bad grammar, and this is stuff that the editors should catch. A separate report from Bleeding Cool's Rich Johnson also detailed a number of others who were axed, including editor Andy Cowrie, Jim Lee's executive assistant Andy Choi, International Publishing, Ad Sales, and Custom Creative Studios Sandy Resnick, Marketing Director Sarah Haskell. Now, I want you to remember that name, Andy Cowrie, because it's going to come up again in the next article we're going to talk about. Now, one thing that the article doesn't cover is the fact that Jim Lee is no longer being listed as the publisher. So it makes me think that Jim Lee is not long for this world when it comes to DC. He also notes that DC Comics will put greater emphasis on digital and bookstores rather than comic book shops. To me, this sounds like they don't have much faith in the direct market, which is the reason why they're going to be putting greater emphasis on digital and bookstores. Unfortunately, this is going to be another death knell for the direct market. And talking to some people at my local LCS, they're not too happy with DC currently. These layoffs come after AT&T CEO Randall Stevenson details on the company's third quarter conference call with investors back in October of 2019 that the company had no sacred cows. Now, I would like to point out that I think that DC Comics is definitely one of those sacred cows, and I'm pretty sure sometime in the near future, it's going to be led to slaughter. Stevenson explained, "We're committed to an objective, diligent, and disciplined process. We'll analyze the merits of each of our businesses individually and as part of the whole. But let's be clear, we have no sacred cows." So why do I think that DC Comics is going to be a sacred cow that is about to get slaughtered? Well, it brings us back to that Wonder Woman 1984 cover. So the question is, who's going to buy this cover? And the answer is very simple, not comic book collectors. And there was a bit of a kerfuffle on Twitter regarding this, and Eisenberg ended up responding on an Instagram post. Eisenberg would respond to the criticism on Instagram. She wrote, "So, due to the subject matter of my art, I'm often asked to draw characters inspired by iconic women. Recently, I was asked to create a piece inspired by Wonder Woman in my own style for an upcoming one-off artist collab." She went on to detail that the character seen on the variant cover is not supposed to be Wonder Woman, but an alien character wearing a Wonder Woman t-shirt. She explained, "I love drawing aliens with realistic body types, living their lives, comfortable with themselves. So I drew an alien character with a realistic body wearing a more everyday version of the Wonder Woman outfit." Now, one thing I want to point out is that Robin actually does handle this rather well. She says her piece and quite frankly is not being a shit about it like we would see from somebody like Gail Simone or Tom King. So she does handle it with some grace, and I can't necessarily blame her. After all, she's the one being commissioned and she did create the artwork. That's fine. But obviously, this is not something that's going to go and sell books, so I really blame DC Comics for this. Eisenberg continued, "DC decided they wanted to use this piece for a variant cover in addition to the collab. I didn't realize that featuring a Wonder Woman inspired character with a realistic body type would be controversial. Apparently, it is." I wouldn't say that this is really controversial, but yeah, you're going to get some criticism for this though. I mean, come on, this is not a comic book cover. The DC Nation posted their cover on Twitter, and it was immediately met with hundreds of comments hating her on her body as well as the non-traditional art style. "And on me personally," she added. Now, I have to state the obvious, you really shouldn't attack the person. You should criticize the argument, or in this case, the artwork. It's not cool. But like I said, she does handle this with some grace. She doesn't default to the usual tactics, which is, "Oh, I'm a victim, I'm being attacked, misogyny and patriarchy." She actually does a pretty decent job of handling the situation. "Gail Simone, I'm looking at you," she wrote. "I think one of the reasons I was asked to do this is that I'm not a traditional comic book artist, so I would present something from a different perspective." So yeah, I blame DC for this mess. You want people to buy your freaking book, hire someone who is a comic book artist that will create a beautiful cover. Eisenberg then concluded, "The fact that this was so controversial just makes me want to continue to draw diverse body types and create more art that people can hopefully see themselves in. Strength and beauty comes in lots of awesome forms, and I don't think one form negates the other. These are my thoughts." Now, there's lots of things that I disagree with what Robin said, but I have to respect the way she approached it. She did a fine job of handling criticism, and she didn't come off as some sort of thin-skinned authoritarian who didn't like the masses going and criticizing her work. She handled it rather respectfully and positively, I would add. DC Comics editor Andy Cowie, who oversaw the shutdown of Vertigo Comics and is recently rumored to have been axed in a massive layoff affecting DC Comics, decided to attack Eisenberg's critics. He wrote, "Robin, I'm a DC editor and I love your work. The reaction to the WW cover on Twitter was provoked by a small group of trolls and is not representative of the larger, sophisticated, and enthusiastic readership I've come to know." He added, "Your art is inspiring and your response is wonderful." Which brings us back to DC, why they're having these massive layoffs, and why things are falling apart. A case in point is this editor. After all, it's nothing more than a small group of trolls who are not sophisticated enough Do appreciate your artwork. Nah, man, it's fucking funny books. When I go and pick a comic, I want a good story and good art. And the cover is, again, what helps sell it. This is why American comic books are dying, man. It really is. Anyway, that's all I got for tonight. I'll catch you next time. Let me know what your thoughts are. I'll see you. Wow, you made it all the way to the end of the video. Well, if you could do me a huge favor while you're here, if you're new to the channel, go and click that subscribe button. Bash that bell for instant notifications.
And Hulk. Smash.
Smash that like button if you enjoyed this video. I even have a P.O. box if you want to go and send me some fan mail. And yes, I finally have received some. Figured I should probably go and update that just because, you know, it's been some time. I would love to give a huge shout out to all my Subscribe Star supporters, because without you, I'd still be making content. But in all seriousness, I do appreciate your support and your help. I want to give a huge shout out to longtime subscriber Toxic Manflu for subscribing to the well hello there big spender tier, and Satiker 7th Legion for the take my money damn it tier. You guys are awesome.